when Patty and I were first married, we live in Southern California. And I had been working with Youth for Christ, a Christian outreach organization. I was going to USC. I was a business major. I was going to make a lot of money. This was my perfect plan, right? And so here's the thing, is that at the end, after USC, I went to seminary, much to my parents' everyone's coming up with a word, but I don't even have a word. Surprise. Yeah, let's just go with surprise. I remember my dad, when I told him I was thinking about going to ministry, he said, let's get this clear. You went to one of the finest schools in the country, and you want to make less money than a file clerk? I said, thanks, Dad. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going. And so here's the thing, is that so Patty and I get married. I'm going to seminary, and part of seminary is you have to finish that by working in a church. I had no desire to work in a church, right? Because pastors were just kind of out-of-date people. I said, okay, I'll do it. And then I found out the beauty of the church, that the church is more equipped to walk people through all of life, right? And so I was interning at this church in Southern California in Covina, and they asked me after I graduated from seminary, would you like to stay? Perfect. Would you like to stay and be our associate pastor? Well, that sounds pretty good, because all our family was down there. All our family was in Southern California. And so then our denomination said, Shawn, this sounds a little comfortable, so we're just going to ask you, it's fine if you end up going here, but just to be sure this is God's call, we want you to send your resume out to at least 10 different places. Okay, I'll do that. So I just looked, and I looked at all the nice places. I sent my resume to Carmel Presbyterian Church, right? Yeah, I hear if the Lord could call me here, I'd be okay. The other one I sent it to, Walnut Creek, because it sounded like Little House on the Prairie. Had no idea what Walnut Creek was like, right? And so 2 weeks before I'm supposed to graduate, the week before I was to graduate, 2 weeks before our first baby was to be born, Walnut Creek, the Little House in the Prairie town, calls me up and says, would you be willing to come and interview with us? Sure, no problem. It was a great opportunity because I didn't want the job. And so I had the best time. I was so relaxed. It was wonderful. It was a great church. I thought, boy, whoever goes to this church, this is a really great church, right? And so I thought, no problem, And so I had a great time. I taught. I met with everyone. Wonderful place. And I was getting ready to go on the plane. And they said, can we have just one more meeting? And we sat down. They said, we want to offer you the job. I went, whoa. I said, my wife's going to have a baby in 2 weeks. I can't do this without her. And I'll never forget what they said. They said, we believe you're the one God is calling, so we will wait. Well, this is going to be a story for my wife. So I get home, I say, yeah, I'm not going to believe what happened. So I said, I think we should just go just to be nice and, and all this. And fulfill our duty. She said, okay. So 6 weeks after our firstborn son comes, it's my wife's birthday weekend, and we go up to a place where we know no one. I mean, at one point they sang her happy birthday, dear. Patty. It's one of those weekends, you're like, and we're like, we are not coming here, right? This is Walnut, this is Little House in the Prairie, but it's nice, but no. And so here's the thing. I would say, well, what do you think we should do? Because, just wanting to be good. And she said, well, I don't know, what do you want to do? So I came up with this little trick. I gave her 2 coins, right? And so she had 2 coins, and I had 2 coins. I said, okay, on the count of 3, open your hand, and if it's 1 coin, we're staying where we're at. If it's 2 coins, we'll go to Walnut Creek. So we're there, they're showing us around, they're showing us all the nice places in Walnut Creek, and so on Sunday the pastor preaches, and he preaches on Gideon. That God called Gideon to go to a new place, but Gideon was afraid, so he hid from God. Afterwards we said to the pastor, did you do that for us? He says, no, but if the shoe fits. So we're in his office, right, and I hand Patty 2 coins. I say, okay, on the count of 3. And I'm thinking, she's not going to do this. Our whole family's down there. No one has ever left Southern California. She's going to go with 1 coin, and then I can blame her, And so that was my whole plan. It really was. So I go, okay, so I put 2 coins in my hand because I thought, this kind of seems where we should be, but I'm not doing this. She'll wimp out. So count of 3. 1, 2, 3. We both had 2 coins, and I thought I was going to wet my pants, right? And we looked at each other. So the pastor had just gone out to talk to someone, comes back to the office. Now we're just peppering him with questions. Go, wait, what about insurance? What about this? What about, can you help us move? And he's like, what happened, And so the thing was, it was really hard. It was really hard to leave our parents and our family and everybody we knew. we knew God was in it. And so we moved. Didn't know anybody. And it was hard, and it was the best time of our lives, and it was the hardest time in our lives. And then we were there, and we were finally settled, and we stayed there for 9 years. Had a great time. I love working with high school students. I still wish I was working with high school students because they're so much more fun than you. But we have a great youth director, so I had to move on. And also, our kids were growing up, right? And so after these 9 years, the pastor came to me one day, and he said, the senior pastor, and he said, Shawn, I don't want you to leave, but there is a church in Houston, Texas. Jesus isn't even in Houston, right? And I said, there's a church. Anyone here from Houston? That's the mute button, Dan. Remember? Dan's new on sound. I said, what have you learned? He says, I know where the mute button is for you. That's all I need to know. Okay, anyway. So he said there's 3 big churches. They want to plant a 4th church. They've got all this money. They got all this. So they send me. He said, would you like to talk to him? I said, okay, I'll talk to him. And so I go over there, and great time. And they said, what would you do if you could start a church from scratch? And man, that got my attention. I started thinking about it. I would like to be a part of a church that would be there for youth, where adults could come and just be who they are. And I started dreaming about this, and I could not get out of my head. And so they interviewed 40, and then 10, and then 3, and then I was their first choice. And I said, Patty, I think we're moving to Houston. She said, really? I said, I think so. And then they decided I didn't have enough experience. God saved me. And so... But so we had just bought a house right here. Our next door neighbor is Clayton. We were right on the Concord-Clayton border, and we just couldn't get out of our head. And we started seeing all these young families coming over to Walnut Creek 10 miles, and there wasn't anything in Clayton. And an interim pastor at Walnut Creek at that point sat me down. He said, Shawn, I see 3 things for your future. You could be a senior pastor of a big church and do very well. You could be associate pastor at a mega church, and you'd knock it out of the park. He says, or if you really had the guts, you'd plant a church. I said, you are nuts. I mean, half church plants failed the first year. And I said, I just wouldn't do that. And we started praying, and we started saying, God, is there somewhere else you have? And someone called us from Fresno and asked if we'd consider going to Fresno. God saved us from that too. I showed up in a suit. They showed up in cowboy boots. It was over right there. But we couldn't get out of our head. We just couldn't get out of our head, and we started looking around and said, what if God was calling us to start something here? Now, I had a sabbatical coming up at that church. They were going to pay me for 3 months just to take a break, and instead we said, could we use those 3 months to start a church? And they said, well, that sounds restful. And I remember that first day, they gave us our blessing, and we said, we believe God is calling us to plant a church in Clayton. And we believe that God was calling us to do something we had never done before, and minister to people that we knew we would love, and we knew it would be hard. And I remember we started, and I went to the building where Ed's Mudville is. Someone said, if you're going to be in Clayton, be in Clayton. And up to that point, they never had an opening for an office and for 5 years in that office back then, in the day when offices were needed. And so I went, and I asked them if they would rent me an office, and they said, well, do you have first and down? I said, no. And the guy said, tell you what, I think we're going to do it. So I remember sitting in that office first day, all by myself. I didn't know a soul. I called my wife and said, would you please bring the kids and have lunch with me? I'm all by myself. And then we said, okay, we want to be a church for families and kids. And you know, I tell you, this has been the hardest thing I've ever done. It's been the best. It's been the best. Because I've just kind of come to peace that I just want to be where God asked me to go. And I'll tell you, I don't want to do a building thing. I would like to be comfortable and settled. And yet I can't escape the fact that I believe this is what God's calling us to do. so we can reach even more people. And I'm okay with that. Because God has always been faithful. And he's going to provide. I have no doubt of that. For 30 years now, I've been trusting God. And I've made mistakes. And there were times he's led me somewhere and I've hesitated. I've held back. But at the end of the day, I believe I'm exactly where God wants me. I have a great wife who shares that with me. I have a great family, and I love being the pastor of this church. But I'll tell you, when God tells you to do something or go somewhere, it is not easy. And so I applaud Abraham just for saying, God, whatever you want. Whatever you want. I'm in. Wherever you want me to go, I'll go. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do. However you want me to follow, I will follow, because I know that life with you will be a life of blessing.